Good morning, everyone. How are you? Can everybody hear me okay? Is it just me and you, JJ, still?
No, ma'am, you are live with the audience.
Okay, I just couldn't tell where the participants were. So, all right, awesome. Well, welcome to this session. Okay, now I see some chat in there. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and get started. My name's Jessie Bennett. I am the Director of Student Engagement at Central Piedmont Community College. And I'm here to talk to you about using the sustained dialogue model to talk about racial justice. This was something that we piloted last year, and I wanted to share that information with you. So last year, following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, our students, our employees, they were hurting and they were grieving. And we felt like we needed to bring people together. So the first thing that I did is I brought my team together to talk through how people were feeling, what they were doing. Obviously, this was in the midst of the unknown of the COVID pandemic. So we weren't in person. We weren't able to see each other in our offices or our spaces. So I really felt like our team needed to come together and talk about what they needed as staff members and what we needed to do to respond to our students and their grief. So in response, we decided to create a 5-week racial justice dialogue series to bring members of our community together to talk about what was going on in our society and how they could share their own lived experiences. So when I first brought my team together, that's when I noticed there was a lot of people talking about their own experiences dependent on what social groups or identities that they might have themselves. We went back and forth a lot about, is this program for students only? Is it for just employees? I work in student affairs, so the programs and the experiential learning activities that I create, I feel like students should always be present. I think that depending on your institution and what the own climate is there, sometimes there's some hesitation about bringing those two groups together to talk about their lived experiences. But at the end of the day, we decided that anybody in our Central Piedmont community was actually welcome. And it's funny because last summer, I had some students that were seeking out Central Piedmont to come in the fall. They had seen these events broadcast on social media, on our blog, and they reached out and said, "Hey, we're not students, but we're enrolled for the fall. Can we come?" I gave them special access to Zoom, and I'll talk more about the process. But so there were members of our community and even prospective students that joined in this process. So a lot of you might be asking, what is the sustained dialogue model? It's just one method for dialogue, and I'll talk a little bit more about different methodologies that you can use. But this particular process is all built on a focus on relationships so that you can transform those relationships that may have problems that are rooted in conflict, that typically may block change. The emphasis is really important on people using their own lived experiences. And so, depending on who the audience is, I recognize that we may have some faculty, we may have some student affairs professionals. This type of experiential learning activity really can bring our two units together. So if you're a student affairs professional in this group, in this audience, these are activities that you can plan. You can collaborate with faculty. If you're a faculty member, depending on the discipline that you teach, you may be able to tie in the conversation to the learning outcomes of your class. You can utilize one of the student affairs experts on your campus to bring this into your classroom. But depending on who you are and what seat you're sitting in, you can think about this as a standalone event, or it could be something that is in your classroom. So what makes this different from other change processes? Well, first, sustained dialogue, it focuses on those relationships rather than the issues. So it conceptualizes relationships based on these 5 areas here. So identity, interest, power, perceptions, and patterns of interactions. So So identity is defined as human as well as physical characteristics. So every single one of us brings a different lived experience to the table, right? And even though we all are a part of different social groups, my experience as a white woman is going to be different than my counterparts who are also white women, right? The same for other people that make up different social groups and classes. Those experiences are not just one and done. So interests are both material and psychological. It's what people care about, right? It's about what brings people into the same space and into the sense of their interdependence in achieving those goals. Power is defined as the capacity of citizens acting together to influence the course of events without great material resources, and not only as they control over superior resources, but it's also the actions of others. And so we all know what perceptions are. I like to always, at the beginning of one of these conversations, let people know that everybody has unconscious bias about different social groups. There's a way to limit them. And having a bias doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person. However, not every bias is negative or hurtful, but it's not recognizing those biases or those perceptions that can lead to bad decisions that we can make in our work life, in our personal life, our home life. And then patterns of interactions are among all those involved, and as the whole group relates to each other. So the dialogue process in itself, it's a 5-stage process. So in the first stage, this is also known as the dialoguing about dialogues stage. It's a complex process of informal changes and exchanges in which participants gradually conclude, often with the help of an external catalyst. So something happens in our society, right, that's bringing us all together. I told you in our case, it was the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. And so we felt like, there's this external force and we need to come together to talk about a problem in a more organized way. So the stage 2 is the mapping and the naming of problems. So participants come together under a moderator's leadership to vent their feelings about a problem and its causes to develop a complete picture of what's involved. This stage usually concludes after a lot of conversation and exchanges, and one participant usually says, at the end of the day, what we really need to work on is an insert here, or what we need to focus on is insert that statement there. And then stage 3 is the why. It's probing problems and relationships. It involves more disciplined exchanges where participants probe the underlying relationship and the cause of the problem. This exchange usually paves the way for those relationships to change. The participants attain a sense of direction to guide them through their next steps. Okay, so stage 4 is the how, and this is designing action. Participants visualize and design a scenario. They come up with steps that they're going to take. It may be taken into a political arena. It could be your own campus, but it's coming up with a process of practical steps that can potentially change troublesome relationships. And then stage 5 is acting together. So participants devise ways that the scenario can get into the hands of the people who can actually help them act upon it. So I kind of want to take a step back and talk about, how did we even know about this method? And I think this is, this conference is about sharing resources. This is one that I truly believe in. If your institution is not a member of Campus Compact, so Campus Compact is a professional organization. Central Piedmont is a member. I know I've seen Forsyth Tech at some of the Campus Compact conferences. I've seen Wake Tech, Guilford. So your institution may or may not have a membership. If you don't, I would definitely look into it. Not only does this organization provide, workshops and conferences for faculty and staff, they also provide those types of resources to your students. There's resources in the form of fellowships. There's resources in grants. They give stipends to students for different initiatives that they have. So your institution may participate in the Food Lion Hunger Challenge that is sponsored by Food Lion, but it's powered through Campus Compact. It's a way for students to build momentum and education around hunger. But there's also an opportunity for them to be an ambassador through that, and it's a paid position. So I say that to say we learned about sustained dialogues through Campus Compact. And so if your institution wants more information, please reach out to me. Their headquarters for North Carolina is at Elon University. Leslie Garvin is a gem, and she constantly sends me just opportunities for our students at the community college that I wouldn't have known about. And I can't say enough good things about them. So we found out about the sustained dialogue method through Campus Compact. I threw this link in here and I'll share it with you, and I can obviously share this presentation with all of you. But, this conversation was obviously about race, but they have several other resources and issue guides for other topics. And these are just a sample that I threw together of what other conversations you could bring to your campus. So if you're a faculty member or if you work in student services, there's definitely something here, whether it be an activity that you're trying to bring on your campus or a conversation that you're trying to have in a classroom that's related to a certain discipline. And those issue guides, I'll show you one at the end. So it really sets up the stage for your conversation. And so when you're planning from the beginning who's going to be a moderator, who your audience is, there's prompts for activities, there's prompts for the conversation. Now I would say just use that as a guiding force. It doesn't have to necessarily fit into that box of just using that issue guide. But it is definitely a great starting point of resources. And like I said, these are free whether you're a Campus Compact member or not. If you go to this link, you just have to put in your name and your institution and what you do that you're related to education, and they'll send you a unique username and password so that you can access all of these issue guides. So what we decided to do last summer was we knew we were going to have a 5-topic series. It started in June and concluded in July. We used those prompts from the Sustained Dialogue Institute and those issue guides to kind of to utilize them as our topic. So the first thing, you know, it felt like we really needed to talk about race and what it is and how it's a social construct. We moved into talking about whiteness and white privilege. We talked about interpersonal racism and racial bias, institutional racism. We talked about it not just in an education scope, but even beyond in the workplace, in employment, in hospitals, healthcare. And then our last, we kind of ended with racial profiling. So we utilize Zoom. For each of our sessions, we typically had about 25 to 45 faculty, students come to these sessions. We gave ourselves 90 minutes for each session. So you want to give yourself enough time that those voices that need to be heard and want to say something, that you give everybody space to do that. You know, obviously, if 45 people are joining, we broke these up into smaller groups. So we might have started in our large Zoom session. We talked about the topic at hand. We might have done a small activity all together, and then we broke people up when it came down to talking about the issue and asking the questions and asking people to share their experiences. We did that in a smaller setting. And I would say, you know, 8 is a great number. 6 to 8 is a great number. I wouldn't go anywhere past 8, just because, you know, you're always going to have people that want to dominate the conversation, and obviously you're going to have a moderator there to guide that, but you want to give everybody the space that they need. You want to make sure that there's a diverse group of people speaking, and so 8 is a really, really nice number for those small groups. So in preparation for each session, we recruited moderators. So for this setting and for this time, you know, I normally would say if this was a student group that wanted to do this, I would say those moderators, you could train students to be those moderators. These were all professional staff members. This was the first time we did this. We did reach out to people outside of student life. So we have a learning community, an EDI learning community. I asked the 2 individuals that chaired that committee if they wanted to help be moderators. We also asked some faculty members to be moderators. I'm trying to think if there was somebody outside of student life, service learning, faculty, and we have a part of human resources. We have a group that's devoted to talent development, and we asked talent development. So we always had an excess amount of moderators on hand because we didn't know exactly how many people were going to show up. We did make people RSVP through a link so that we could send them the Zoom information, because the Zoom information just wasn't public and out there for everybody to access. And so I will say, you know, we didn't have a lot of drop off like we normally did. I don't know if that was because it was during COVID and people just, you know, it was the beginning and people wanted to be around and they needed to be around other people and they weren't exhausted by Zoom yet. But we didn't have a lot of drop off. So if we had, you know, 60 people come, we typically had, or 60 people RSVP, we had 50 show up. So when you're choosing your moderators, you obviously want to let them know, like, they're responsible for managing the group. They're going to keep the dialogue on track in terms of time, in terms of topic. They're going to be there to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. They play an active role and critical role ensuring that that community, that small group community, taps into its own knowledge. So good moderators value people and their ideas. They think quickly. They're not there to teach. So that's not the goal here. They're also not there to talk about their own opinions in that setting. They're going to have to troubleshoot. They're going to have to stay on task and stay on time. They're going to have to refocus the group every once in a while. One of the things that I would say that we ran into, we had more employees than students for some of these sessions. And so making sure that we, because my team is student affairs professionals, our goal is to engage students, making sure that those students have that space as well, and they're not intimidated to use it because only faculty or only staff are talking. So they're going to ask clarifying questions. They'll restate your group norms, and they'll ask the group for their reactions to tough moments, but they don't let them veer out of I statements. So that was one of the biggest things I would say in our planning session was, giving the moderators the training that they needed to feel comfortable to moderate these tough conversations, right? We came up as a group, we came up with our activities together that we wanted to do. So whether it was the large activity that we did with the whole group, or if we were going to do a smaller activity in the group setting, all of that was pre-planned. We did come up with group norms. So those were stated to the larger group at hand at the beginning of every session. That space is created for everyone to talk about their experiences, but there are certain things that wouldn't be tolerated, right? You're not going to tolerate hate speech. You're not going to tolerate people directing to other individuals about what they just said. We did alert the counseling department of each of these activities because at the beginning of each session, I dropped into the chat a link for students that if this conversation was triggering to something, if they needed to reach out to somebody else afterwards, that those resources were available through counseling for them. And I also put into the chat because employees were present. I think that this is a community college system wide, but I put in our EAP counseling for employees to have access to as well. And then we created a call of action. So we didn't want students to just come to this, talk about the change that they wanted to have, like what was the next thing that they were going to do, whether it be, a podcast that they could listen to, or a TED Talk, or a book, or any other resource that might have been available at the time, another program or activity that might further the dialogue afterwards. So like any good program, we had learning outcomes, especially because we had faculty that said, this is great. I'm struggling this summer to come up with how to keep my class engaged. I would love for them to come to this and directly relate it to the coursework that they're doing and those learning outcomes. But these were our specific learning outcomes that we wanted all participants to walk away with, regardless if they just came because they were interested in talking about this or if they were coming because their class was requiring it. We wanted students to articulate how their social identities inform their own values, beliefs, and attitudes. We wanted them to be able to actually talk about those and feel comfortable in this setting. So the setting itself was very important to us in creating an inclusive environment. We wanted students and employees to be able to identify at least one critical inclusion related issue on Central Piedmont's campus. I will say, when I wrote that learning outcome statement, I wasn't expecting all of the information that I received, and to the point, I didn't know where to take that information at first. Is this Do I take this to the dean of students? Do I take this to HR? We had students divulging a lot of information, and we had faculty and staff voicing a lot of concerns. So I ended up writing a report, which wasn't initially what I intended to do. And I sent it to both. I sent all of the information without opinion, my own opinion stated on what needed to happen or how to rectify the issue. I sent it to those entities. And we do have right now an EDI council who is made up of employees that is taking on those issues that people voiced. And then in the fall, we have a new EDI committee that's comprised of students only who will also have the access to this information. And so we also wanted people to walk away with a greater appreciation for what other people's experiences are, and learning from those perspectives of the people that they, sit in classrooms with, or who sit in, on our campus as colleagues. And then we also wanted participants to be able to demonstrate increased social responsibility and leadership. So this is exactly what a dialogue session looked like. A welcome happened. We introduced each of our collaborators or moderators. This gave us time to, if you've ever participated in Zoom and you're trying to break up small groups, that gave us the time and the buffer to divide up those groups. And what we also did was when anybody logs into Zoom, you can put your name, right? You can put your name, your preferred pronouns. We asked people to put if they were a student, a faculty, or a staff member. And that also let us, it gave us the flexibility to make sure that one group didn't have all faculty, or it didn't have all students. We wanted each to be sprinkled with each of those, right? So that faculty could hear what students were saying and students could hear what employees were saying. We didn't want just one group in those groups. We talked about the group norms. That's really important in those guidelines. Sometimes we did the activity all together at the beginning. Sometimes we had the dialogue and then we had an activity. It just depended on the conversation and what we were trying to accomplish. We always gave time to come back to reflect, and I'll talk about reflection in a minute. But obviously, just like when you're broken up into any small group, you want to hear what the other group talked about, right? So we always gave time for us to come back together to share those key takeaways. One piece that I do want to say that I don't think I mentioned is that we didn't require that someone's video be on. We didn't require that everybody spoke. So this isn't where, a question is asked and we go around the circle, or what's the other one thing that people say, or I'm going to pass the ball, I say mine and then I pick somebody else in the group. That's not what this is about. So it isn't forceful. It isn't about each person answering each question. And I'll be honest, when you see the issue guides, there's a lot of questions there. And as a moderator, that's just a starting point. Sometimes I ask questions based on what people said that were not on the issue guide. Yeah, so we came back, we reflected, shared key takeaways, and then after each session, the next morning, I sent all participants a call to action. And so this is a sample of what the call to action was. This one was after our third session where we talked about bias. And so we gave them some tips to a podcast to listen to, movies, YouTube videos. We gave them an activity to practice with their family members to talk about bias and to do at home. So we tried to give them things to keep that conversation going long after we stopped the actual session. So this was some feedback. So we did send a survey out to everybody after each of the sessions. And so I'll just go ahead and read both of these because I think they're pretty powerful. So a student said, my experience as a student being part of the racial injustice dinner was very eye-opening. There were topics that were being discussed that aren't often spoken about, in which I was glad to have had the opportunity to be a part of it. I think that having discussions with people that aren't always so comfortable is a great way to understand who they are as a person. I really appreciated that faculty and staff at Central Piedmont took the initiative to have this program, considering everything going on in the world currently. And then the next one, I don't necessarily know if it was a student or a faculty member because these were anonymous. But this person said, my biggest takeaway from this experience was understanding that everyone does not have to agree with my views, but I should always give someone the opportunity to share their views so I can understand it and see it from a different perspective. So as the director of my area, I have been thinking a lot about more ways that we can blend student affairs and academic affairs together to accomplish what we both want to accomplish, right? We want students to have these great experiences. I think that both of us brings a talent to the table. Obviously, I think as student affairs professionals, we're constantly having to think about how to stretch our dollars farther and farther. And one of those ways that I'm constantly thinking is, you know, I want a captivated audience. I don't want to play the guessing game of, you know, if we put this out there and even if we have it marketed for 2 months, you know, how many students are going to come? Partnering with a faculty member gives you that automatic audience, right? So I think it's just a natural that if you are a service learning or student life department that is responsible for planning these type of experiential learning opportunities, it's a given to try to partner with your faculty on your campus to do these. And as a faculty member, I would think that you're constantly trying to think of new and inventive ways to keep the class engaged and interested. And this would be an exciting way to do that. And what's great about this is this kind of dialogue can happen, we know now, can happen in a virtual setting, and it can happen in an in-person setting as well. So, and I think that we should utilize them in both moving forward. So obviously, these dialogues focus on creating community, a community of inquiry through experiential learning. And I think that these types of communities help us overcome certain educational barriers that have been identified in both theoretical and empirical service learning literature. So if you're a faculty member, and I do have a slide for student affairs professionals as well, if you are thinking about doing this and you don't know where to start, right? So what's next? Define your goal. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to teach your students how to have a civil discussion? Are you trying to have them make a connection to your coursework? You know, I think that the topic of race, you could relate it to so many disciplines, sociology, psychology, history, political science. You know, I think you can make the argument for any discipline that we offer. If you're a student affairs professional, you're obviously trying to make connections between students and have them have those connections with each other. So if you're a faculty member, though, work with your student life or service learning coordinator to come up with an activity. You know, you don't have to use the sustained dialogue method. I'll talk about some other methods that you could use in a minute. But pick some type of activity. Set the limits. Most in-person and virtual activities, they fit really nicely into an hour and 15-minute class time. If you have a 50-minute class time, it obviously can be scaled down to that. And then obviously a big piece is the reflection assignment. So the reflection assignment is a key component of bringing everything full circle, right? of what the student just experienced. It promotes interpersonal communication, problem-solving skills, self-awareness, a sense of civic responsibility, a sense of belonging. It enhances the student's critical understanding of the course that you're teaching and those topics, and their ability to assess how those relate to their own values and goals and progress. So it moves from the what to now what. It should be continuous, connected, challenging, conceptualized. It shouldn't just be, write a paragraph on what happened and how you felt. It needs to be a little bit more of that. It needs to be a little bit more meaningful, so students don't just feel like they're doing busy work, and so that they really can connect the dots to that class, and what they've learned in your class and how they're going to take it outside. So examples are journaling prior and post, so having some prompts that they might answer beforehand and then after, and maybe connecting the two, like why did they change? So video reflection is a great way. Creating some type of product to solve a problem is another example. The possibilities are endless. So there are some other methods outside, other than sustained dialogues, and some of them you may have heard of. Campus Compact is obviously where I have found some of these, deliberative dialogue being one of them. What makes deliberative dialogue a little bit different from the sustained dialogue method is it's an opportunity for students, faculty, staff, anybody else in your community to gather to discuss a public policy issue. Just like the sustained dialogue issue guides, there are deliberative dialogue issue guides that you can, and these ones are for purchase, but they're usually like $5 a piece. And then you can just make copies to distribute to your class or your participants. But they allow them to deliberate 2 or 3 solutions, to make choices with each other. So they have to take a stance on, okay, there's a choice A and a choice B, and I'm for A, and here's why. And that's where they get to talk about their own values and why they have made that decision. And then they get to listen to somebody else talk about why they might have chosen option B, based on their own values. They provide a way for people to share also diverse views and experiences, to have and create a shared understanding of the issue. And after, even though a group is choosing A and B, they need to come up with some type of hybrid solution that they that they would come up with. So as far as there being some common ground for action. It does require reading before the discussion. So they'll have to read an issue guide. They'll have to see what those 2 choices are. And then they get to talk about why they're choosing one of those choices in your group discussion. Living room conversations is it's a simple, social, structured way of practicing communicating across differences, while understanding relationships. So 4 to 7 people meet in person or by video for about 90 minutes. And rather than debating or convincing others, they take turns sharing and learning. So in this one, there is a little bit more expectation that participants are sharing their opinions. There is no preparation required. The Human Library Dyad Partners is another option. It's designed to create dialogue and understanding across people, where volunteers volunteer as what's called a human book, and others can check that book out through a one-on-one conversation, so that they can learn about their shared experiences. And then film and documentary screenings are obviously another method that you can utilize to talk about race, or any other issue that you'd like to talk about in your class or outside. And all of these can be customized to correlate with the learning objectives of your course. So there is some intersectionality between race and poverty. We know that in the United States, economic inequality is both racialized and it's gendered, and our Black and Latina women consistently are at the bottom of the economic hierarchy. So these are some other experiential learning opportunities. Just thought I'd throw out more ways that you could create spaces for your students to have these types of conversations. And these are some of the other methods that we've done. So we do, and I put that all of these are virtual because we've offered them virtual now for a whole year, but we obviously do each of these in a in-person setting. So we do a poverty simulation, we do a refugee simulation. Oxfam is a very moving experience. And then we also do a disability simulation. So if you are a student affairs professional here, you know, and maybe you haven't established those faculty connections yet, you know, and you're working on it, you can start with students. So these are other ways that you can do a sustained dialogue. You can start with a student club. You can train students to be your moderators. And each of them has their benefits and each of them has their challenges. And it's just going to depend on your situation and kind of where you guys are at and who's coming to you. So if you have a student group that's coming to you saying, you know, we really need to talk about this situation that's going on, you know, right down the street here in Charlotte. You know, what should we be doing or what can we do? That's up to you. You know, you may feel like you have students that have a strong commitment and that are going to be able to invest some time in this. And then you might have where it might be both, right? Like you're having students lead these conversations, but they're supported by staff, or your staff might be leading them all together. So I did want to give time for questions. Here's my contact information. Please don't hesitate like emailing me if you have questions about some of the resources that I talked about. This is my email address and my phone number. I do want to make I do want to look in the chat because that's something that yes, I will share the issue guide website. Will you share your presentation? I will definitely share the presentation. Can I add the presentation right in here? Just curious if I can do that. Does anybody know that? Yes, I can. Okay. Did you explain the topic first? For example, the social construction of race or implicit bias is not very well understood by students or faculty staff. It seems a short lesson. Yes, so we did feel like that. So that was our first topic, Kate. We talked about what is race and how it is a social construction. So we did do that one first. So the other thing is you're going to have a mix of people who have come to all the sessions and some who have not. So we did not record them. I didn't even ask people if they wanted those to be recorded, but I did share the issue guide and the activity with anybody who said they were going to come and anybody who signed up after that point, just so they can have an idea of what those conversations were, what the prompts were, and what we may have discussed. Where can I? Any other questions? I'm trying to figure out how to add the presentation right here. JJ, if you want to give me like how to do that, I'd appreciate it. There is the link for the issue guides. I'll just hang out here for a few more minutes. If there's other questions, I'm going to try to see if I can figure out how to pop the PowerPoint into here. But if not, I really do appreciate y'all coming to this, and I look forward to possibly doing this conference, and I guess in 2 years, because it rotates every other year, in person again. And so I get to see your faces and talk to each of you and engage with each of you. But if not, this will do. But I really miss seeing y'all in person. So thank you so much. And I am still trying to figure out how to put this into here. Email it to me as needed. There should be a plus button on the chat to add. Oh, okay. Is it there now, y'all? Or is it there? You might just be the only person here, JJ. I don't know. Emily, I've added the presentation link, but it's here, but it's not showing in the chat. Does it show for y'all underneath the chat, like above type your message? You don't see it either. I don't know. So the question was, how much of my budget did I spend on this curriculum or programming? So for this sustained dialogue, we didn't spend anything. It was all virtual. I think that had we done this in person, like maybe would have had refreshments. Now the deliberative dialogue issue guides, those are for purchase. And those are typically anywhere from $5 to $15 an issue guide. But once you have them, I would say take them, create a library or a database of those things so that you always have access to them. But there wasn't any money that we spend on this programming. I mean, obviously, we are members of Campus Compact. That membership is $3,000 a year. And so this is obviously a tool that we learned there. So you could say that might have been an expense, but you have me, so you can utilize me if you can't get into Campus Compact right yet. This is so weird. Like I can see it underneath the chat, but it's not, I don't know why it's not showing for y'all. But if y'all just email me, then I would be more than happy to send it to you. And I can email it to JJ right now as well. All right, well, thank you so much. I appreciate all of y'all. And I hope that y'all have a good rest of your day and a good conference. Bye, y'all.